That is recording. Awesome. All right. So yeah, thanks again for coming on. So yeah, I guess we'll just jump into it, and yeah, we'll see. Time is 8:40. So yeah, if we say like 25 minutes ish, just
Hmm.
so that way you're in time. Awesome.
Yeah,
Hey
sure.
everybody, thanks for tuning in the Online Footprint Project. I'm your host Ross McFarlane. Thank you so much for investing your time with us here today. So really excited for today's guest, Jacky Habib. She's actually a freelance journalist. She's contributed to places like CBC, the Canadian Film Board, and she used to be a TV reporter in Kenya. So that's really exciting. So Jacky, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks so much, Ross.
My pleasure. Yeah. So, yeah, your story is really interesting. I was having a look at your website before, and I was seeing that you're actually a media trainer in Ghana. Yeah, years ago. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it was definitely a really unique position. I had my media background, and I was also really interested in working with nonprofits and working in a context of international development. And so this gig just landed on my desk, and I was really
Yeah.
excited to go for it. And so I spent 6 months working at a radio station in Ghana, training local journalists there and encouraging them to report on more human rights related stories in particular.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's such a interesting place to be. I'm very close friends with the president of the Ghanaian Society here in Adelaide. It was his partner's birthday the other week, so we all went out for dinner. So, yeah, know a lot about the history, and yeah, very interesting place. He actually just came back from there to visit some family. So, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
Amazing.
So, how did you get into freelance journalism? Because that's really interesting that you've managed to create a career out of really just research and stories, and yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm talking to you from Canada right now, and I'm based in Toronto. I went to journalism school in Toronto, actually. And so after graduating from journalism school, I knew that I wanted to tell really interesting stories, and I had no idea how I was going to go about it. And I think just by nature of the industry it is, I was bouncing around from place to place. And so I
Yeah.
did TV producing, and I worked in radio, and then I did media training for a bit, and I worked as a TV reporter. And so now I do a lot of online writing as part of my freelance journalism, and I write stories that I'm interested in and important stories that I'd like to tell.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like it for sure. So, are you still traveling with work, or are you more based in Canada now?
Yes. So while I'm based in Toronto right now, I do travel quite a bit for work, and so I actually spent the last year living in Kenya, and that's when I was working as a TV reporter. So I worked for an outlet that was based in Nairobi, and that's where I lived.
Yeah.
And it's called Nation Media, so it's the largest media house in East and Central Africa. And so I
Oh,
was
wow.
telling stories for them, usually related to social issues and development, because that's what I gravitated towards. And so I tend to travel quite a bit for work, and I'm still sort of splitting my year and splitting my time between Canada and Africa. And I say Africa because it's a few countries in Africa. So
Of
I've
course.
lived both in Ghana and Kenya, and I travel back there for work and for my business and for the nonprofit work that I do as well in those countries.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so you have a very full plate.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I really enjoy the aspect of traveling and even just being in a place long enough so that you can make friends and become a lot more familiar with a place than you would normally just traveling through. And so I'm lucky that through my work, I've been able to live in a few other places, and they feel like home for me.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. That's the thing. It's once you start to become part of these communities, then it really does feel like a home away from home. So, that's incredible. And you mentioned you do a bit of non-profit work as well.
Yes. So that actually this came out of my experience working in Ghana a few years ago.
Yep.
So when I was working there, I developed some amazing relationships with people, and I was giving a lot of thought as to why foreigners like me often travel to developing countries. And typically, we're the teachers and the trainers and the mentors. And I had met so many fantastic people who were just telling really interesting stories and who were so smart and well connected on the ground in Ghana. And I thought, you know what, there's got to be a way for me to connect them with travelers and really work on flipping the typical power dynamic that happens so that instead of us going to a country that we don't know much about and trying to help and jump in and,
Yeah.
save the
Yeah.
Africans, there's all of, you'll often see that in media and pop culture and lots of people who will try and do that. So what we do is reverse it and actually send people to learn from locals. And so through my company, New Lens Travel, I send people off on these trips where they're partnered up with local storytellers and they work on learning, listening to what's happening on the ground with African storytellers, so people who are rewriting narratives about their country. And so the philanthropic work also comes through that. So as part of New Lens Travel, what we do to give back is we also support the next generation of storytellers. So we run media training camps for youth,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
particularly in slums, and we work on teaching them basically how to tell stories about their communities. So from taking photos to writing and learning how to get their stories in media so that they can change people's perceptions about where they're from, because often they come from communities that are stigmatized.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible work. So I imagine that's really rewarding and helps so many. Yeah. So congratulations on being a part of such a big task. So I guess for those listening in at home, obviously this isn't live, but for those that will be listening, how would you recommend for those that do want to get into, say, journalism or have a keen interest in sharing other stories? How would they get into such a field?
Hmm. So journalism is one of those industries that you can actually do without any sort of schooling. And so unlike being a doctor or something like that, it's not necessarily licensed. And so there are lots of people who are freelance writers and engage in various aspects in the media without necessarily having a background in that. And that's totally fine, of course. And actually, I think it's great because often these people who have background in other areas can often lend their expertise. And so whether you're a researcher who wants to get into media or someone with a background in business, you obviously have insights to offer that are valuable. And
Yeah.
so obviously sharpening up your ability to tell these stories and to communicate is really important. So spelling, grammar is a must. And then also just honing down on what makes a good story and how can you get a better sense of what a good story is and how to angle particular stories so that you can start writing and developing an audience who wants to engage in the type of content you're creating.
Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense. Because, I mean, as you said before, unlike a doctor where it's all these schooling. I mean, is there any trainings that you know of that can help further people's education for journalism, whether it is, say, in English or anything like that?
Yeah, there are definitely a few tools, and I can send you some of them actually, and so that you can include links to them. But
Perfect, thank you.
one thing that comes off the top of my mind, for example, is Grammarly, which allows you to check your spelling and grammar sort of on the fly.
Yeah,
That's definitely a really good tool. There are definitely some other websites I can send you and I use some of these when I do the media training for students or for other journalists, helping them sort of tell better stories. And so part of that is learning the storytelling aspect, and then part of it is also technical, depending on how you want to tell stories. So for example, a few months ago when I was in Mombasa in Kenya, I ran a workshop there for a group of youth who wanted to start a radio show or a podcast.
cool.
And so I walked them through a training, and there are tons of online resources you can use that will walk you through how to do something like that and how you can use free software and tools to do that. So all of that exists, and I definitely encourage people to play around with it.
Yeah, I'll have to steal that from you actually, because later today I'm actually recording a pilot for a, digital radio show for a radio station. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to
Oh,
steal it from
fantastic.
you.
What will that radio show be about, Ross?
It's a business podcast, so it's similar to this, except there'll be a co-host. So there'll be two of us, so we have a bit of a laugh, but at the same time, try and keep it serious. We'll always have a guest as well, because I've really been enjoying doing this for many months, and today's been fantastic. Really interesting story, and it sounds like you've done a lot of travel and you've helped a lot of people. So learning other people's perspectives around the world is just I think so important for personal growth. So I mean, yeah, coming on, like, thank you so much for coming on. This is great.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, I might have to steal some of those links in addition to putting them in the comments later.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I'll send some things your way.
No, thank you. So I guess, Jacky, the question is, well, what's next? What are your plans for, with your career, and is there anything that you think you're going to be progressing to next, or is there any countries you're traveling to next, or anything like that?
Yes. So next on my radar actually is going back to Ghana and Kenya. So
Yeah,
with Newlands Travel, my company, I'm launching some trips for this summer. And I personally lead the group trips. So that will have me
cool.
heading back to Kenya and Ghana, which is really exciting. And so previously I've run trips in Ghana, and that was great. And so now after having lived in Kenya and understanding, what what it's like to operate in the media context there. I'm really happy to expand with my company there. So that's something new that we're doing this year. So that is definitely on my radar. And in the future, I'm looking forward to doing a lot more projects sort of in the intersection between media and development, and also working on social enterprise projects. And so that's one of the things that has, I guess, kept me busy for the last little bit is when I was in Kenya, I connected with a group of artisans and they run a
Yeah.
cooperative. This is a very quirky, different thing, but what they do is they recycle discarded animal bones. So
Okay.
they go to butchers and they take the discarded animal bones that aren't being used for anything, and they repurpose them into jewelry and crafts,
Oh,
and
cool.
it ends up being just these like beautiful keychains and necklaces and things like that that you would have no idea came from a recycled animal bone. And so they
Yeah.
really needed help promoting the work that they do, and they needed more support because people didn't really know what they were doing. And so I randomly just met them and we clicked, and I
Yeah.
wanted to support their work. And so one of the things I did was I started bringing in tourists, and we ran workshops where instead of them just making and selling these crafts, people could come and make it themselves. And so Kenya gets a ton of tourism, a lot of people who are there for safaris or for vacation.
I can imagine. Yeah.
They have beautiful beaches, and there's just so much to do in Kenya. And so I thought, this would be a neat thing to sort of attract people to come to the workshop. Um, and so yeah, we've been running workshops ever since, and it's been going really well. And so I love, because obviously as someone in media industry who has strong communication skills, but also I do a lot of marketing in my
Yeah.
work and for my company as well. I'm able to come up with some ideas and know tools that can help us in doing that. And so I've loved working with that artisan cooperative. And yeah, I feel like more things will sort of come across my plate like that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how I can use the skills that I have to get involved in projects like that and do some good work with people.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's really cool. Because sometimes it just really the path we're on, it just kind of appears out of nowhere. So it's really cool that just kind of along the way you're finding all these new and interesting projects, and with a lot of the work you're doing, it sounds just so incredibly rewarding as well. So that's really cool. So I mean, with traveling to places throughout Africa, I mean so many lovely places, so many lovely people have. And I guess no matter where you go, there's always going to be the odd, hairy part or anything like that. Have you ever come across anything in regards to the safety of if you're traveling too far out in certain regions or anything like that?
I I've actually had very positive experiences,
Yeah. Which I imagine
especially.
you mostly would, absolutely, because a lot of lovely people over there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as with any place in the world, I think there are some areas to be avoided and that sort of thing. But coming from um, a woman who does a lot of independent travel,
Yeah,
I found Africa to be quite safe, and everyone who
cool.
come across has been like super, super friendly. I remember, I know Canadians have this reputation of being so nice and friendly, but I remember when I lived in Ghana, I thought, like, I don't know how we got this reputation because everyone in Ghana is so incredibly kind and friendly. Everyone will want to befriend you on public transit. And if you're lost, they will literally take you by the hand and show you where you're
That's lovely.
supposed to go.
Yep.
And people are just always willing to support and help. And so I've had really positive experiences with that. And funny enough, I get this question a lot. A lot of people are curious about, what it's like, and, how do I live? Do I live in a hut? Am I in a village? And, people have this idea of Africa looking a certain way.
Which is
I
very
mean, every
segmented
country,
areas.
yeah,
Yeah,
every country is very different. Every city is very different, right?
definitely.
And so I can only speak to the experiences I've had, which have all been great and positive. But I've definitely noticed a pattern of, people's misconceptions or assumptions about a place,
Yeah,
which you can't blame them because our media and pop culture feeds us certain stories, and we
of
see
course.
certain images over and over, of poor starving Africans and, a typical like mud hut. And so we can't imagine landing in a city like Nairobi where there's high rises and there's,
Exactly. Yeah.
Instagrammers and people who do drone photography, and there's celebrity gossip bloggers. And like, these are the types of people that, I was meeting in my profession and thinking like, this is so interesting. I think, um, I can really take the work that they're doing to challenge the assumptions people have about a place, right? And so now
Definitely.
that's what I do with my company, with New Lens Travel. And I literally called it that because I wanted to use travel as a way to help people develop a new lens about, what Africa is like and the stories that people are telling there. And yeah, I just found that, sending someone to a place where they're open to learning and collaborating with locals, they end up having a very different experience than, sending them out to a remote village where they, people might not even speak English, so they have basic communication barriers. And like the
Yeah.
typical sort of volunteer trip in Africa is very, very different from the type of experience that I offer through New Lens Travel. And that's because I want to expose people to parts of the country that they usually don't see, and that we rarely see represented in media or represented well.
I can imagine. Yeah, so that's fantastic. I love the name as well. Good, really
Thank
good representation. So I guess for
you.
everyone listening in at home, how would they, be able to get in contact with New Lens Media or anything like that, so that way they can experience, these travels and things like that?
Absolutely. So you can check us out online. The website is newlenstravel.com. And if people are interested in traveling abroad or getting in touch with me, there's a contact form on that site. But we're also on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find us everywhere on social media. So we definitely like sharing a lot of interesting, inspiring content of people who are doing really great things in Africa and trying to challenge the narrative from pitying people to thinking like, how can we support people who are already doing really great work there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, that's awesome. No, Jackie, this has been an absolute pleasure. I know you've got another meeting soon, so I figured, we'll wrap this up here. But I'd love to keep you on for longer. But no, this has been phenomenal. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. And it sounds like you're doing some absolutely wonderful things, and you're helping a lot of people, and yeah, really helping change people's perspectives on different parts of the world. So yeah, really glad that we had this chat today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Ross. I'm very delighted to be with you here today. And like I said, if anyone wants to get in touch about my work or they have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. So thanks again for having me.